sermon series today. If you've been with us the last sermon series, there's almost like they almost kind of dovetail a little bit, and I love that they do that. And when we are sort of mapping out our sermon series, we're usually like 2 or 3 months ahead of where we're going to be. And so when we sort of put these sermon series down on the calendar and mapped them out and planned them, it was well before a lot of the chaos and the things that have happened out in the world in the last month. And before a lot of these tensions sort of became exacerbated and grew in all of the current events that have happened. And I'm going to touch on some of that in a little bit, but just so you know, like it's really interesting when it would be perfectly normal for a church or a pastor or somebody to be like, hey, there's this stuff going on out there and we want to talk about it in here. But it was kind of the opposite for us. We're like, we're going to talk about it, and then stuff happened out there. And so it kind of created just a cool environment where you're like, wow, maybe I guess God was probably doing something there, huh? And so we better keep walking with him. And so this idea of Monster Mania, like October is the month of Halloween. Not my favorite holiday, I'm gonna confess. But I don't really get too into all of the imagery, of Halloween, and I don't get too into horror movies or anything like that. I'm not a big horror movie guy, but I have watched some, and kind of the idea was like, hey, this is kind of the spooky month. What if we did this series called Monster Mania, and we kicked it around, and we kind of, the idea being that we kind of create monsters out of other people. We kind of create monsters out of other people groups. And the church has kind of been notorious for this all through its history, of sort of villainizing or demonizing other people. But at the same time, we know from church history that there's a lot of times when the church also has allowed monsters to live and operate within the church. And we hear all these terrible stories of things that people who are in leadership in churches or are affiliated with churches have done. And at the same time, we also kind of recognize that we have our own battle inside, that we fight our own, not literal demons usually, I don't think, but like we would call it like a proverbial, our demons. Like we're struggling with our own things internally. And so this all kind of like stirred up into this thing where like, well, let's do a sermon series. Let's call it Monster Mania, and let's explore these monsters. And let's try to sort of look deeper beneath the surface and see if there's anything that we can learn and grow and let Jesus challenge us on. And so today, week 1, we're going to look at monsters that we've created as I'm going to say the Big C church, because I'm not going to put the label necessarily on us, but I grew up in the church, and if you've experienced church, you know that there are certain people groups, there's certain, groups of people who participate in certain behaviors. There's certain things that we've sort of like villainized throughout church history. And so I want to explore some of that today. And I have a couple quotes that I want to start with. And neither of them are like Christian thinker quotes, okay? In fact, they might feel a little bit obscure, but I'll try to explain. So the first one is from Nietzsche. And interestingly enough, Nietzsche actually, his dad was a Catholic priest, and so he did have some experience with God, but I don't think he really walked that path completely. But here's what he said. He said, "He who fights with monsters might take care, lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long into the abyss also, or gazes also into you." So, interesting quote. I don't know what an abyss is. I've never seen one. I certainly have never gazed long into one. But this idea that like monsters, I grew up in church, and I always heard this language like, we're in a battle. It's like good and evil, There's this war that we're a part of. And obviously we're good, and obviously they're evil, And so there's like this idea that like we're in this battle. And if you think about this, it's something I've thought about a lot actually in the last few years, is that sometimes if we think something is evil and it needs to be destroyed or taken down, that we can actually go to lengths that are evil to try to remove the evil. And I think that's kind of what this quote is getting at, is like that it's possible for us in our effort to destroy something that we think is bad, to actually participate and to actually become bad in order to do that. And there's a sort of a challenge there. There's sort of an introspective challenge for us to consider our own self, our own hearts, our own path as we engage with something that we think is like, this is bad, it needs to be taken down, it needs to be changed. And the second one is from, so you might know this quote, actually. I think most of you have heard it. So it goes like this, ruh-roh. It's from Scooby-Doo. So, like growing up, I watched Scooby-Doo some. Sometimes my mom wouldn't let me watch it, okay? Strict Christian home. That's how I was raised. And here's the thing about Scooby-Doo, right? Is like, it seemed like every time at the end of Scooby-Doo, they're like chasing this monster. The monster is like scary, is bad. And then finally they get to the end and they catch the monster and the monster's all tied up and they walk over and they pull off the mask and it's like somebody they recognize, you know? It's like, Mayor Stevens, you know? It was you the whole time? And so it's like all of the fear, all of the, you know, things that were going on. It was like, it was somebody under the mask. And that I want that to frame kind of our conversation today, because I want to talk about how really I think when we look at our monsters, when we look at the monsters that we as a big C church, as a little C church, as individuals have, and we sort of remove the mask, there's something different than what we expect underneath. And all of our fear and all of our sometimes hatred, sometimes anger, sometimes frustration, it's all sort of aimed at this monster that we see, but when we remove the mask, we see something very different. And so I want to talk about 3 unmaskings today. And the first one is going to be unmasking the monster. And I want to read, I want to like just explore the story of the Good Samaritan. You probably know it. You've probably heard it. I maybe even talked about it. I sometimes can't even remember because I've talked about lots of things. But I want to read it together, but I want to look at it in a little different lens today. And so we're going to look at Luke chapter 10, and it says this in verse 25. It says, "Now an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus, saying, 'Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?'" Deep question, and a good question for all of us to consider. And Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you understand it?" The expert answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." These are the 2 most important commandments. It's almost like he had listened to Jesus and heard that Jesus already said this. And so Jesus said to him, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But the expert, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" So the man asked Jesus, like, who's my neighbor? And he's asking that question, but you can kind of read the subtext that what he's really asking is like, who do I get to exclude from being my neighbor, right? Like, who do I get to say, like, is not my neighbor? Who can I put in the monster category? Who do I get to hate? Who do I get to not like? Who do I get to oppose? I know I should love my family. I know I should love the guy living right next to me, but who's in the bad category, Jesus? Who can I reserve for that? And Jesus replied to the man by telling him a story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers. Now, there's something Jesus is doing with this story because we know he's going to get to the Samaritan, right? But the people that were listening didn't. They hadn't heard this story in Sunday school yet. So they're just hearing it as they go. And they know that Jerusalem to Jericho is part of the route that one would take if they wanted to avoid Samaria. So if you can imagine a map, you have, it's almost like anybody familiar with the Bitter Valley? Okay. It's almost like you have Hamilton at the bottom, and you have French town, or Florence and Lolo at the top, and then there's Stevensville in the middle, you know? And wait, hey, who said that? You're ruining my example. This is kind of how it was broken up, right? Like you had Jerusalem down at the bottom, and then you had Galilee up at the top, right? There's these two areas of Israel, but then in the middle, if you wanted to go from one to the other, you had to go through Samaria. You had to go through Samaria. And the Samaritans and the Jews were opposed. They didn't agree with each other on religion. The Samaritans were half-breeds. They had married in with other peoples, and so the Jews didn't look at them as the same. They were other. And so there was actually such hostility that if you traveled directly through there, you were risking violence. You were risking the chance of being attacked because they would see that you're a Jew and they would attack you. They would rob you. They would do whatever. And this kind of created this alternate route, It's like, well, what if there's got to be a way we can go around? And so they had this alternate route. And Jericho, from Jerusalem to Jericho, was the first leg of that route, to take you around Samaria, not through Samaria. And so you can see what Jesus is doing when he says basically like, here's this man. He was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell in the hands of robbers. And it's immediately making them think like, well, that he was going there to avoid the robbers. He was going there to avoid the monster, to get away from the bad people. And these robbers stripped him, beat him, and went off, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw the injured man, he passed by him on the other side. So to a Levite, when he came up to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan who was traveling came to where the injured man was, and when he saw him, he felt compassion for him. He went up to him, he bandaged his wounds, pouring olive oil and wine on them, which doesn't sound that great to me, but it must have been a good thing back then. I'm like, I'll take the first aid cream. No, olive oil and wine, it's good. But when he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him. Whatever else you spend, I will repay you when I come back this way." Which of these 3 do you think became a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The religious expert, in religious law, said, "The one who showed mercy to him." And so Jesus said to him, "Go do the same." So Jesus asks, who was the neighbor? But my question that I want to look at this story from today is like a flip-flopped angle of who is the robber? Or who is the monster, excuse me. We see Jesus asks, who's the neighbor? And he says, well, the Samaritan. But when I look at this story and I ask who is the monster, it kind of paints it in a different light, right? Are the robbers the monster? It's a pretty monstrous thing that they did. Jesus doesn't really address it. What about the priest, a man of God? And he sees this poor fellow, but he just can't be bothered, and he passes by on the other side. Seems like a pretty monstrous thing for a priest to do. The Levite, the religious elite, he can't be bothered either. Is he the monster? These were church people, the churchiest of people, but they couldn't be bothered to help the man. They came upon his wounded body, and they wouldn't touch him. And finally, and keep in mind, this is the way that they're hearing this story is not through the context of, oh, we know about the Good Samaritan. It's like they're hearing it as it happens, and then all of a sudden Jesus says, and then a Samaritan came. And I'm sure their first thought was like, oh, not a monster. What's he going to do? Because that was their impression of the Samaritan, was that this guy was a monster. He was their monster. And when Jesus, just like Scooby-Doo, right? Jesus is like, oh, you think he's a monster? Okay. Watch this. He showed compassion. He had mercy. He demonstrated self-sacrificial love. And Jesus pulls off the mask, the monster mask, and they look at him and they go, oh, the monster isn't the monster. The monster is my neighbor. The one who shows mercy, the one who shows compassion. The Samaritan doesn't shy away from a little blood. He pays for the man who was Jewish, by the way, to be cared for. And Jesus pulls off the mask and he shows us the person that we are demonizing, the person that we are villainizing, the person that we look at and say, that's the monster, is actually our neighbor. And I say this because, like I said, I've grown up in church and I've seen the different monsters that the church has created. And we have a long history of these. And so, some big C monsters that, just the church in general has sort of painted out there. Science is a big monster, right? They're just trying to prove that God doesn't exist. And, going all the way back, the church was like executing people that came up with ideas like the earth is round or things like that. You know what I mean? Turns out it is. Just going to leave that there. Or maybe it's not. No, I'm not a flat earther. I'm kidding. Heretics, right? It's so interesting to look at church history, right? And the relationship with things that were considered heresy. Because there was points where, like, for hundreds of years, a heresy would actually take over the church. And then later they'd be like, no, that's a heresy. Sorry about the last 100 years. You guys were doing it wrong. But then they would kill the heretics, the monsters that were speaking the wrong things. Other religions have been made into monsters. People who struggle with certain sins or have had things in their past, things like divorce, right? Like, maybe you've never thought of that, but I know I've talked to so many people who have been divorced and they struggle being a part of church because they feel like they're a monster. They feel like they've been treated that way. Things like people who've participated in abortion, people who are immigrants. There's all kinds of things that have become things that we've made into villains, we've made into monsters. When I was a kid, I used to ride around with my dad in the truck, and we would listen to Rush Limbaugh, And Rush Limbaugh was very clear about who the monsters were. It was those liberals. They were the monsters. The Democrats. We got to stop them. Those big government-loving monsters. And the thing about it is, it's obvious to me in light of recent events. And I'm going to talk about Charlie Kirk for a minute. But it's obvious to me in light of recent events that we have a monster problem when it comes to people whose politics don't agree with ours. And I have to be honest, there's some parts of the last few weeks that have really surprised me in the way that we as a country and as people and as Christians have treated each other. And an event like that, an experience like that, it's sort of like, to me, it's like, I don't think it creates anything. I think it sort of reveals what's already there. And we're going to talk about the heart in a second, because Jesus unmasks the monster, and he shows us the monster is actually our neighbor. But he unmasks our hearts too. And he shows us what's actually in our hearts. For a lot of people, especially as sort of, the events after Charlie was killed have kind of come forward, and you start to see people's reactions, and then the reactions to the reactions. And everything that people are saying and doing. And for some people, Charlie was the monster. And here's the thing that's hard about when we make other people the monster, when we make people groups the monster, is that then it becomes like okay to do whatever's necessary to stop the monster. Because that's how monster movies work, right? Like we've seen the monster movies and you're like, it doesn't matter. If you destroy the entire downtown Manhattan, but you get the monster, it's good. And I'm like, I hope they evacuated everybody first because those skyscrapers are just like, you know? But as long as you get the monster, anything necessary. For some people, Charlie was doing battle against the monster, right? He was the white knight out there fighting the monster. I guess for both, it seems like the other side is the monster. The people that don't agree with me, they're the monster. The people who voted for him, they're the monster. For some people, the shooter was the monster. For some people, there's a massive conspiracy going on, and the deep state is the monster with their ties to Israel. Because for some people, Israel is the monster. I'll have to be honest, the thing for me that felt like the monster in all of it was watching people celebrate it. Like the TikTok dances and the joy, like ding dong, the witch is dead kind of stuff. That's what felt monstrous to me. And in the wake of it, I don't know if you felt this, but I felt a lot of confusion because I was like watching friends arguing in the comment sections of Facebook posts. And I was watching parents arguing with their kids, and it's all just right there, and people just see it so differently, and you don't understand. He said this, and he did this, and you don't understand. He stood for this, and he stood for that. And it just showed how deep down inside we have monsters. And we think the people in that group, or the people that say those things or do those things, they're the monsters. Paul, the apostle, wrote this, and I'm going to circle back around to it, but I just want to bring it to the forefront right now. And it's a little bit of I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit of a like gotcha kind of moment, like, aha, like no context, just take this verse. But the context is that he's talking about putting on spiritual armor. The context is that Paul is saying like, hey, put on the armor of God. But he doesn't mean like Christians, you're going to battle. So seriously, like get your armor out of the closet and put it on. But again, it's that battle context that is such a struggle, right? Because that battle context is like, well, who do we go to fight against? Point me to the monster and I will put on my armor and we'll go to battle, right? But that's not what Paul's saying, because after he explains this, he says this, he says, for our struggle, in Ephesians 6, is not against flesh and blood. It's like we don't go fight against people. That's not the point. He says our struggle is against the rulers, against the powers, against the world rulers of this darkness. And like there's a lot of things here that I've heard people try to expound on this and really be like, this is like the layers of demonic realms. And yeah, maybe this is ideas, maybe this is systems. There's obviously a spiritual nature here that we have to admit that there's something spiritual going on. And whatever that spiritual thing that's going on is, it's something that wants us to be fighting each other. It wants the battle to be in our hearts and our minds against other people. But Paul is saying our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's a spiritual battle. It's against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. I took some time this week preparing and just thinking about this, and just to sit with Jesus and be like, Jesus, what's your heart in all of this big mess that we find ourselves in? And honestly, I felt like I could just hear him weeping. Like I could feel his heart broken for humanity. And it wasn't over one thing. It was over all of it. Because I feel like all of it bubbled to the surface in this moment. It was all kind of like opened up, and you could see what was underneath. And it was like the school shootings and the political assassinations on both sides, the joy and the cheering over death and the hatred of one another and the sorrow and the grief and the pain, and all of it just sort of like wrapped up together. And I could just feel his heart heavy and burdened for us as people. For humanity. It's a spiritual battle. But one of the things that the spiritual armor does is that it protects our heart. And the Bible tells us that our heart is like, it calls it the wellspring of life. Like everything that comes out flows from what's inside. And so Jesus, while he unmasks our monster and shows us that it's actually our neighbor, it's actually somebody to love and somebody to care for and somebody to have mercy on, he also unmasks our hearts and challenges us to be honest about what's in our hearts. There's a verse, it talks about bones, so it's kind of like monster themed a little bit. But Matthew chapter 23, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, because if there's one thing that Jesus called out a lot, the one monstrous thing that Jesus seems to take issue with above all else, it was religious people whose hearts had grown cold. It was those who had spiritual authority, but they didn't use it to have mercy and compassion and to love those. They actually used it to manipulate, to control, to exclude. And so he says this because he's rebuking the Pharisees, but he's describing this situation that can happen to us, right? Where we have our hearts need to be unmasked. We need Jesus to work in our hearts. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones." See, monster theme. "And all uncleanness. So you too outwardly appear righteous to people, but inwardly are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." I don't know about you. When I go to passages to be convicted, these are the kind of passages that I read. Because I've been in church a long time, and I've worked in church a long time. And it's easy to try to like polish the outside. To be like, praise God, brother, everything's good, everything's fine. But on the inside, to be full of dead men's bones. And this is what Jesus was confronting even in the religious teacher that asked him who my neighbor was, right? He's saying like, look, the Samaritan, you look at the outside and you see a monster. You see somebody who's not even fit to be interacting with. And yet he was full of mercy and compassion and care. And that's what you should be full of too. And so when I read this, it challenges me, because those who resisted mercy created an opportunity, right? Like the priest came along, and if he would have had mercy on him, it would have been done. The Levite would have seen nothing but maybe a little blood stain on the highway. And after that, the Samaritan would have walked by and would have had no clue. Maybe somebody hit a deer with their Tacoma. I don't know. But instead, the fact that the two of them resisted mercy gave an opportunity for the Samaritan to have compassion. And when I look out at the world right now and I see the sides that they're opposed and they're mad at each other and they're fighting in the Facebook comments and they're saying their piece and they both think that they're right. And yet they seem to be unaware that in that moment they might be missing the opportunity to have mercy. But that creates an opportunity for us to have mercy. That if we resist the urge to make somebody into a monster, if we resist that urge, we can have the opportunity to have mercy on those right in front of us. And I told Andrea I was going to quote her, but I didn't tell her it was her. I just told her it was a prophetess. But if you know Andrea worked here for quite a while, and Caleb, her son, he's preached up here a few times. Andrea preached up here. But Andrea put on Facebook, kind of in the wake of all of this, and seeing like the way the world was hurting. But this is what she wrote, and I wanted to read it to you because I feel like it's powerful, right? She said, "I haven't wanted to post anything on the recent events. I'm choosing to spend my energy praying for those affected. But can I encourage those of you who are hurting for just a moment? There is something you can do. Go actively love someone near you. Tell your people you love them. Serve them selflessly. Do something kind for someone that can't return the favor. Choose to be present with the people you encounter and pray for those that your heart hurts for. Turn all of this emotion inside of you into good that can be released into the atmosphere. We aren't powerless, and truthfully, posts don't matter, not even this one. Go do good in your space." I think that's really beautiful, right? Because there's something about monsters that suck our energy. We fixate on them. We read articles about them. We get down in the Facebook comments and we see everybody's reaction to them. It's easy to let all of our focus get pulled to the monsters and get distracted from the people who are in front of us, the people who we go to work with, who we are family with, who are with us consistently, the people in our churches, the people where we shop, the people at our post office. If there's one thing that Jesus modeled, it was seeing people in front of him and loving and sacrificing for them. And so as Jesus unmasks our hearts and we repent of the dead bones inside, let's let him also give us eyes to see those around us. And the last thing I want to touch on today, and just really quick, is actually unmasking Jesus. So this is kind of I don't know. This is what I've seen in the last couple weeks. Is I've seen a lot of people who are saying things like, well, the Jesus I know wouldn't ever endorse this. And then on the other side's going, well, the Jesus I know says this or does this or that. And it's interesting to me that this has kind of become a battle for who Jesus is, right? Because who your monster is, if you have a monster and you believe Jesus is on your side, you know, he's against the monster too. We're on the same team. I kind of like imagine this as like when people pray before a football game, you know? I'm like, whose prayer does God answer? It's like the Broncos, they had 3,750 prayers and the Packers had only 2,079. So the Broncos are going to win today. It's like both sides are praying, right? And I kind of imagine this like they're in the locker room getting ready for the game, and then Jesus comes in and he's wearing a Broncos shirt. And they're like, oh, he's on our team. Jesus is on our side. And then they walk out on the field and they see the other team coming out, and then they look over and Jesus is over there walking out with that team too. And he's definitely not wearing a Seahawks jersey, but he's wearing a Packers jersey. And they're like, wait a minute. Jesus he's on our team, but he's on your team. But how does that work? There's this moment where Joshua is about to go to battle with Jericho. This is before like the walls fell down, that whole song, the kids song. It's a Bible story too, before it was a kid's song. But he goes out and it's like, it says, now when Joshua was by Jericho, he raised up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him with a sword drawn in his hand. Kind of a scary deal. Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our enemies? Whose team are you on? Right? He said, no. Not the question I asked. Let's try it again. Us or them? My team or their team? And he said, no. Rather, I have come as the captain of the army of the Lord. Now, a lot of people think this might be what they call a theophany, which is kind of like Jesus appearing in the Old Testament. The angel of the Lord. There's these different titles, right? But here he is. And I love this verse because it's like Joshua's like the people of God, right? Israel, the children of God. Of course, God's captain of his army is going to be on our team. We're the people of God. And we're going up against Jericho, the monster, the bad guys. And yet, what does he say? He says, no, I've come as the captain of the Lord's army. And Joshua fell on his face to the ground, bowed down, and said to him, what has my Lord to say to his servant? And the captain of the Lord's army said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet. The place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Which side is Jesus on? No. The Jesus I know wouldn't. He's on my team. Well, the Jesus I know doesn't agree with this. He's on my team. Which Jesus do you serve? How many Jesuses are there? You show me your monster, and I'll show you a false Jesus. Because the monster that Jesus is calling us to is the spiritual monster. And he's on the side of saving and redeeming me, and saving and redeeming you, and saving and redeeming all of the ones that we call monsters. Colossians 1:19 says, for it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, whether things on earth or things in heaven, having made peace through the blood of the cross. Jesus is at work reconciling all things to himself, collecting everything, gathering it all up into his arms, and bringing it under his peace that he made on the cross. And it kind of is like a big bear hug. I don't know. You ever try to like get all your kids into one hug? And there's like one kid in the middle like, he's like, can't breathe. But the funny thing about that is like, if you imagine Jesus bringing all things into a big bear hug, you might get smashed real close next to somebody that you thought was the monster, only to find out that Jesus loved them too, and that his work on the cross included them, and that he's gathering them up under his banner of peace. There once was a man, and I'm going to end with this if the band wants to come. There once was a man who presided over the public execution of another man because he thought that man had some ideas and beliefs that the first man disagreed with. And he found that the second man's ideas were extremely harmful and dangerous. And so he helped stir up a mob, and that mob executed the second man. The first man realized that these ideas weren't going to stop just because that guy was dead. And so just because he had him killed, it didn't mean that the ideologies and the harmful things were going to quit. And so he actually set about trying to imprison and kill everybody that agreed with that man. And everybody that would say his, would spout his dogma and his ideology. Do you know who that man was? His name was Saul of Tarsus. And Saul of Tarsus embraced doing monstrous things to stop the followers of the way, those that proclaimed Jesus as Lord. He sought out to hunt them down, to drag them out of synagogues and out of homes in order to put them to death or throw them in prison. And he presided over the stoning of Stephen. He did monstrous things. And yet Jesus didn't see him as a monster. In fact, Jesus confronted him and he brought him in and he healed him. And Saul was redeemed and his name was changed to Paul. And he became one of the greatest evangelists that ever lived. He wrote most of our New Testament. He planted churches all throughout the world at that time. So I want to challenge you with this idea. Because sometimes it feels okay to say like, yeah, but people who have done really monstrous things, we can say they're the monster, right? We can put them in that camp. And yet Jesus steps up to that plate and says, there's nobody I can't save. There's no one I can't redeem. And in fact, the person who you might think is the greatest monster may actually be the greatest catalyst for Jesus to use to change the world. And it was actually Paul who later wrote about the struggle, right? Our struggle is not against flesh and blood. The battle is not with each other. We just wrapped up that sermon series, The Crowded Table, and the whole point of that was like that at someday, right? Like there's this picture in Scripture of a big celebration, a big table, the marriage supper of the Lamb. We're all invited to the table, and that when we get there, there might actually be people at the table who you didn't expect to be there, who you didn't want to be there, who you thought shouldn't be there. Because we have people that we've said, these people can make it, but these people definitely won't. They're the monster. And I just was thinking about this week because I was thinking about the crowded table. I was thinking about this series and kind of how they do sort of dovetail together. And I thought, what's it going to be like when Paul sits down at the table across from Stephen? You know? It's like, hey, about that one time. And Stephen's like, which time? You know? You're going to make me say it? Which one are you talking about? The time when we what? Dragged you out of the city and stoned you. Oh yeah, that time? What about it? I mean, hey, look, like it's, like I was confused, okay? I didn't know. I could just see like Stephen smiling a little bit, you know, and then kind of breaks into a big smile. Like, it's okay. I know you thought I was the monster. And guess what? I kind of thought you were too. Just I didn't have a mob. But man, look what Jesus did with it. Jesus took the moment and he turned it into something beautiful. He took the moment and somehow with his incredible redeeming power, he healed it. And he turned it into a beautiful church that still exists, that's still going. And I just think this idea of the executed and the executioner sitting together in love as brothers is that weird picture of what the kingdom is meant to be. And it's so hard, it almost feels impossible for us to imagine how could it ever come together like that? How could it ever be healed that much? And yet that's what we're called to as a church. We're called to that kingdom. We're called to that peace. We're called to that king who has the power to heal anything. Would you stand with me?